Hello, friends. Welcome back to another edition of No Cap Room on the Ball Don't Lie podcast network from Yahoo Sports. My name is Jake Fischer. I am the senior NBA reporter at Yahoo Sports, and I'm joined as always by my man, your man, everyone's man, Dan Devine. What's up?
Jake, sources close to the situation inform me that you are signing a 3-year, $36 million deal to stay with Yahoo Sports. Can you confirm or deny?
I would love to confirm that, but that's definitely not what I make.
This is what I get for buying the aggregators. Aggregators, you've steered me wrong again.
If Yahoo ever wanted to throw me above the non-taxpayer mid-level, that'd be more shocking than Monty Williams making more than every other player not named Bojan Bogdanovic on their roster. So that's my segue to bring it back to the NBA. Yes, free agency is not upon us, but we are on free agency eve. We're recording this Thursday afternoon, 12:41 Eastern on my clock right now. You'll probably have this in your eardrums as early as late afternoon, early evening to get you started, get you ready for Friday at 6 p.m. when all this stuff that we're going to be talking about that is kind of sort of maybe potentially being discussed under the table illegally, not happening,
They don't
will
do
be
that.
able to be actually discussed and numbers attached and what have you around the league. That was a bunch of mumbo jumbo to not get anyone in trouble or allude to the fact that I know things that I maybe do. But
Don't do that. Don't do that thing. That's not fair. When you're like, I know exactly what it is, but I can't say it.
I don't know exactly what it is. I'm not saying that. I'm saying
because that's a thing that like when listeners hear that and they're like, all these reporters know stuff they can't say. Well, first off, yes, every reporter knows stuff that they can't report yet. But it's like you're in a part of a little club that they don't get to be in. But soon enough, the velvet gates, or the velvet rope will open and we'll all be inside. And then we can scream and yell about who got too much money and who didn't get enough.
No, I think this is it's a great way to kind of give one little stump speech that I do on every little podcast and radio appearance. So I might as well do it on our big boy show.
You're the people's insider. Give the people your stump speech.
All this stuff, they're all like a sequence of dominoes. It's the cheesiest metaphor to use, analogy to give, but it is what it is. Like the Indiana Pacers, the Detroit Pistons, perhaps the Orlando Magic, the Houston Rockets, they're all looking at the same types of guys. They all can't go to the same team. They all can't, like not 7 guys can go to the Cleveland Cavaliers on their non-taxpayer mid-level. So a lot of the stuff, a lot of the talks that are being had right now that I know that I can't say aren't the final numbers. They're teams jockeying and using each other as leverage and this kind of, if not A, then B, then C, then D. It's kind of, this is the best analogy I'm ever going to come up with on this podcast. I'm going to throw it out right now.
Okay.
I was never in a sorority, but
good start. All right.
How I've learned recruiting or whatever the terminology at every school pretty much does it. Like it's a little more open, I think, on the boys' side of things. I think on the ladies' side of things, it's like far more rigid and crazy where like the rushes, they give their ranking, their preferences of the sororities they're going to join. It's just so stupid I do this, but I love it. And the sororities give their rankings of girls they want to join. And then it kind of, I have not watched the Alabama Netflix doc that's out there, but this is the type of drama that I will be able to shift my attention to once free agency finally ends. All this is to say, there's a sequence of events that can happen that can either help players, hurt players, and just a matter of seeing how it all unfolds. So anything you want to critique or make fun of me at for saying that I just said to you on the Zoom call right now?
No, I'm psyched that that's the best analogy you're ever going to come up with on our show. It's all downhill from that. Detail, light, tortured analogy about a show you haven't watched. So hopefully we can maybe reach higher than that on future episodes. But I understand not wanting to pressure yourself. That's good. You want to reserve your energy for the news breaking to come. The thing that I thought about most, though, you're absolutely right. So much of this is like a shopping list and items get crossed off because there's not one of everything for everybody, and it's a scarce market. So maybe we should take a moment before we get into the meat of the conversation to talk about the item that appears to be on the top of the market and whether that player is actually going anywhere.
Great segue by you, because
professional.
The Damian Lillard trade saga that never ends, that might not even be a trade saga, but is a trade saga. there's pretty much, they had a meeting on Monday. I will be candid, able to glean much more than what has been reported elsewhere, because it seems like the idea was to keep a lot of what was discussed there under wraps. But if Damian Lillard doesn't go, if he stays in Portland, to go back to what you were saying, that's going to have ripple effects across the league, in that teams like Miami, and primarily Miami, that are hoping that will be a potential avenue for them to get better this summer, they're going to have to do something else. And there ain't a lot out there compared to Damian Lillard. It's going to come close to that. So, yeah, to keep it in Portland for a couple of minutes, I'm not certain what exactly they can accomplish here to make this team much better of a contender in the Western Conference, where I was talking about this with someone earlier in this morning. Like, pretty much everyone outside of San Antonio is going to have expectations to at least make the play-in tournament. Right. The Houston Rockets aren't going after, and we'll get to this later, but Fred VanVleet and Dylan Brooks and Brook Lopez, and go down the list, to just not make the play-in tournament,
Right.
So it's not going to be a guarantee for Portland to even be like a stamped, Europe playoff contender no matter what they do. And I think that's also potentially why we haven't really heard a ton of smoke out there about them, because they're going to have to pick their shot. Like the Blazers only have a limited number of bullets to keep making analogies and metaphors. They're kind of like Captain Jack Sparrow out here. They don't have one bullet to shoot, but like, if you fire it too early, if you trade Anthony Simons for, fill in the blank, and it's not what you needed, then you could end up being like the Brooklyn Nets, where they pushed off Kevin Durant's trade request, and then come the trade deadline, they're blowing everything up, and they're collecting Mikal Bridges and picks and starting a whole different era all over again. So I'm definitely staying tuned, but at this point, I don't have much more to bring to the public, unfortunately, about what to see on the horizon here, because I think it's a hard challenge that the Blazers are really needing to figure out themselves.
Yeah, a couple things. One is, I'm pretty sure that's at least the second time you've referenced Captain Jack Sparrow on the podcast. So listeners out there, I'm going to start calling you the NC Armada. NC Armada, if you're out there and you can keep a running tally of how often Jake references Pirates of the Caribbean,
Armada. That
would be great for me personally, and I think for the growth of the show. Two, just quick things on Dame. This from Sean Hyken of the Rose Garden Report. This was the statement that Joe Cronin gave to media after the meeting with Dame. I met with Dame and Aaron Goodwin this afternoon. We had a great dialogue. We remain committed to building a winner around Dame. The follow-up reporting is just like, he hasn't actually requested a trade. He's going to wait and see. And this from Howard Beck's table setting sort of free agency article in GQ. Quotes one Western Conference executive as saying, everybody is waiting on Dame. Once the Dame situation gets cleared, that's the domino that needs to fall for everybody else to move. It is entirely possible that domino does not fall, and that we, for the third consecutive offseason, enter free agency wondering when Damian Lillard gets traded, come out of free agency with Damian Lillard not traded, and it's what winds up mattering is what all happens elsewhere around that, while we're all kind of watching that staring contest happen. So the issue for the suitors for Dame, obviously the most widely reported ones are the Miami Heat and the Brooklyn Nets, but also everybody else that they might have their eyes on, or their players that are under, that are going to be hitting the unrestricted market, or in Brooklyn's case, the restricted market with Cam Johnson. There's all these other players that sort of wind up with their futures in the air, depending on this. Unless guys decide they're going to get going and they're not going to wait around to see what happens, which might happen for one of Miami's guys, which I think was something that you kind of wanted to hit into as we sort of set the table a little bit ourselves for what to expect come Friday at 6:00.
Yeah, let's get there. So in trying to come up with mechanisms to touch on various pieces of the board here in free agency, I've thought about how there's just from my conversations and also reading other reporters' information, there's a couple bells of the ball out there this free agency. A couple of guys who are, I think, no matter what, going to get paid. There's guys like Grant Williams and Gabe Vincent and Austin Reeves to a different degree who can definitely get a huge payday from someone, not their current team. Reeves is a little bit different with the RFA. Williams is a little bit different with his RFA, but that they're very dependent on how the board shakes. These other guys, these bells of the ball, we're calling them, they're going to get paid, it sounds like, no matter what. The most interesting one I want to talk about at the top that you were referring to is Max Strus, because I like Max Strus. I went to OKC for a week in December, talked to Max Strus. Really like inspiring, honestly, kind of story of him coming back from a torn ACL when he was like cast aside from Boston, cast aside from his hometown Chicago Bulls after he played college ball at DePaul. And he's this rehab story in Miami, Heat culture. We all know that. I am surprised at the wealth of interest for him at the salary numbers that are kind of being floated around for him, being above the non-taxpayer mid-level. So any team like Cleveland or Minnesota that should be having access to their full non-taxpayer mid-level, like I totally would understand why you'd want a proven postseason player who's started on 2 of the last 3 Eastern Conference champions, right? 2 last 4. I also, though, am a little bit skeptical just looking at how these recent shooter contracts of Tim Hardaway Jr., Joe Harris, Duncan Robinson down the list have like aged. A 3-year deal where
like milk in the sun.
Yeah. A 3-year deal with a team option or something like that. I mean, I'm going to just double check this right now. I believe Strus is represented by Priority. I would think with the muscle of Mark Bartelstein behind them, they would not be trying to have that 3rd year like non-guaranteed or something, but a team option is different than like that weird Chris Paul like $5 million whatever. I don't know. We'll figure that out. Anyway, he's just gonna get paid, and to the point where there's all these teams at the non-taxpayer mid-level that want him, that they're thinking, well, you might have to go above to get him. So good for Max Strus, but Dan, is there any reason to believe that he will be worth that type of investment compared to those other contracts that we just talked about? It'll be a little bit less, I think, than like the 18, 19 million that those guys got, but it's still a figure that I think a lot of people around the league would have raised an eyebrow at like back in the May draft combine.
Yeah, I think the argument for it, or why it's likely to age better, is that he's just a more capable and physical defender than those other guys we talked about. Like Duncan Robinson kind of flew out of the rotation in part because Strus ate his lunch there and was a more credible defensive player across multiple perimeter positions and was like able to stay on the floor into the playoffs. And Joe Harris, had some of that, but also injuries were an issue there. And like the issue with when you're paying a shooter is, obviously someone like Bertans was a sitting duck on that end no matter what. But even though he was big, Strus has played played in a lot of different defensive responsibilities across multiple positions for a team where if you don't defend, you don't stay on the floor. So, and he's 27 years old. Like you're getting peak years from him, 6'5", not like a super huge or super great athlete, but 6'5", some athleticism, and just a motor. So I think that the argument is, when in doubt, shooter that can defend well enough to stay on the floor in the playoffs, and it's not like a size concern where you can have him defending 2s and 3s. And that's, you're not going to get everything, check off every box in a player that's, coming off of like a 2-year, $3.5 million deal and is going to be in that mid-level conversation. But the boxes that you hope to check off in terms of volume shooting off of movement, being able to shoot off the catch, and that defensive component, like he's probably the best option at that spot, which is why all those teams that have those holes on the wing would make a ton of sense for him. And even teams that you might look at it and say, do they really need that guy? It's like, well, when the guy is a plus shooter who you don't have to worry about as much defensively, you can always use another guy like that.
You can always use shooting. And as we've seen with Duncan Robinson getting dusted off and having a key role in the Heat playoff, push that Strus is probably going to get rewarded because of, shooting always has a utility piece in that belt for the coaching staff to just be able to reach back and dust you off and put you back in the rotation. So
yeah, it's kind of funny that like Strus's emergence moved Duncan Robinson to the back of the line, and then Duncan Robinson comes back around, and then that might make it a little bit easier for Miami to accept losing Strus. Like it's kind of a circle of life among, undrafted, dusted off shooters.
What's old is new again. Is that what the expression is? Yeah. So
that's how I feel. I feel brand new right now, baby. Let's go.
Who's going to feel brand new is Fred VanVleet after he gets paid by either the Toronto Raptors or the Houston Rockets. He's the next belle of the ball. I don't know. I haven't heard him specifically connected to the Clippers yet. The Clippers, depending on how frisky I want to get in the second half of the show and how much I mean, the Clippers are up to something. Like, obviously, they almost got Malcolm Brogdon in the 3-team trade with Washington and Boston that brought Kristaps Porzingis ultimately there. They would have traded Marcus Morris and brought Brogdon back. The medical's there, whatever. Yesterday, one person said to me, maybe Brogdon even is still on the cards for the Clippers. They've been calling all over the league, offering Marcus Morris and Norm Powell. I mean, they definitely looked into Fred at the trade deadline. I don't know. I mean, I haven't heard them linked to Fred at all, but they're looking for point guards. So,
and have been since like 2 years ago. I mean, like there was like the Lowry noise on the Toronto end of that before he even went to Miami.
For sure. So all that's to say, Fred VanVleet's going to be fine. Fred VanVleet is making big money no matter what happens.
And there's a moment to Stan, a bet on yourself legend. Like, this is an undrafted guy who had the opportunity to be drafted in the second round, but said, nope, I'm going to sort of spot my landing, go where I want to go. Worked his way up from the G League in Toronto to starting to the bench, and that bench mob with Siakam and those guys starting alongside Lowry, and then 4 to 85, and now in line to maybe like make that 85 back in 2 years. Like we will go from undrafted out of Wichita State to $250 million in NBA salary at some point soon. Like, incredible work for Fred VanVleet. You gotta love to see it.
There you go. I believe he will take a meeting in LA, I think. I don't know 100% the location. Don't have that confirmed, but he is represented by Clutch Sports, which is based in LA, and most of this stuff happens in LA. I believe he's taking meetings with both teams, the Houston Rockets and the Toronto Raptors. So either way, he'll be getting paid. But right now, as Mark Stein wrote in his Substack very directly, most people around the league are certainly of the mind that Fred VanVleet is more likely than not to join Houston after all that is said and done. So we'll see which way he decides to go. I'm curious most by all the Rockets rumors, because there's been a bunch of Kyle Kuzma stuff there. I mean, go down the list. Chris Middleton was back with the James Harden stuff, and Grant Williams. I mean, Bruce Brown's coming up there. Like, they can't sign all these guys, like we were saying at the top. So if they and the Rockets are up to all different types of trade conversations too, as I've written about a couple of times this week, whether it's KJ Martin, Usman Garuba, Ty Washington, Josh Christopher, all their young guys. I don't know exactly how they're going to be bringing in all these people they're linked to, but Brook Lopez does seem to be at the top of their list behind Fred. And if he goes back to Milwaukee, because Brook Lopez is going to either get paid from Houston or paid by Milwaukee, as it sounds. That's how it sounded for a couple weeks now. Mm-hmm. If he decides to stick in Milwaukee, I'm curious what the Rockets do at center. That's really why I wanted to put Lopez on this list, because I do think he's a belle of the ball. I do think he's going to get paid because he's got multiple options. But I'm most fascinated by that outcome being that I heard the Rockets were looking at Jakob Poeltl. Sounds like he's going back to Toronto if they can find, the numbers that they all like on years and details and what have you. I would think maybe if their goal is to really upgrade at center above what they already have, they will have to take to the trade market at that point, because the rest of the centers in this class are mostly the veteran, journeyman, the Andre Drummond, Mason Plumlee types. So I would just advise our listeners that if Lopez does not go to the Rockets right now, my read on what Houston would have to do there, if again their goal is to really bring in a veteran center for new head coach Ime Udoka, I would start to look at like the Clint Capellas and whichever other rim protecting centers, or even just above average on defense centers are available. I don't know. I'm very fascinated to see what they do there again if that scenario becomes fruition.
Yeah, the Lopez interest makes a ton of sense to me. Just as, you bring in Ime Udoka, you're looking at adding Fred VanVleet. The multiple reports, including your own, connecting them with Dylan Brooks as a number one perimeter defender. Lopez as runner-up defensive player of the year and first team all defensive center, plus a floor spacer. Like, we've seen the way he can help institute a framework on both ends of the floor for a team like he did in Milwaukee. So it's like I was talking to somebody this morning and they sort of described it as like a baseball team building up the middle, like center, shortstop, center field. Like, point of attack defender, perimeter defender, rim protector. Like all of a sudden the Rockets have a real defense. And then once you actually have a real defense, you can figure out how the other young guys fit into it and like which perimeter guys make sense there. Much tougher to do if Lopez is not there. But yeah, I mean, you wonder if it winds up being, dice rolls like, I don't know, like Nerlens Noel as like a low end version of that kind of rim protector, right? Or like, I don't know if Bismack Biyombo is going to be earmarked for a return to Phoenix as they just try to re-sign all their own guys to churn through the market there. But that kind of thing where it's like, give me a rim protector who can be a screen and roll partner for Van Vliet. And that at least provides us some organizational structure. But sort of the point that you're raising here is like the big question underneath or around all that is one of the only young guys that has really shown big flashes early for them is Alperen Şengün. And so but there's many, like a ton of questions around whether you can build a quality defense around him as your center. They have not yet, but there's also maybe a lot of other reasons to be concerned about, or a lot of other contributing factors for why that has not happened in Houston yet. But in terms of offensive ability, the way he can be a playmaker, serve as a partner in the two-man game for Jalen Green or whoever else was a ball handler, be a hub from the elbows. Like there's some of that, down market Sabonis, Jokic kind of a way of that he's played. And their offense, the rare points that it made sense last year, it made sense when they were running more of it through him. That what his role is in we need to get stops, we need to be professionalized, we need to move forward. Minutes are not just going to be given out under Ime Udoka kind of atmosphere. I think that's going to be an interesting thing. And like, if they start looking in the trade market and in sign in trades, like I don't think that they're going to start shopping Şengün around or offering him up to, see what they can get back. But as you said, like I think it's 9 or 10 players age 21 or younger on that roster right now. And they're making a point to bring in veterans. So like not everybody's going to stick around there, and what kind of center they want and whether Şengün fits into that, I think will be interesting to keep an eye on.
Next bell of the ball, Dante DiVincenzo. I've heard that there's confidence on his side of things that Dante will be receiving potentially non-taxpayer mid-level money from 6 possible teams. That's a lot. Teams I've heard: Minnesota, Detroit, New York, Cleveland. So again, like not all these teams are going to get all these guys and all these guys are going to get this money. But Dante does seem to have enough interest that I'm putting him on the bell of the balls list. I think he's going to be secure. His gamble of taking that 2+ or that 1+1 biannual exception with Golden State last year to get a payoff this season, I think it's going to work out for the Delaware Jordan. Is that what his nickname was when he had the whole most outstanding player run with the Villanova?
Big ragu. The Michael Jordan Delaware. That's true. The Knicks would be interesting because they go last season and they sign Jalen Brunson and then they bring in Josh Hart at the trade. That like we thought that the Leon Rose Worldwide West front office was going to be like a Kentucky pipeline. And then we thought maybe with RJ Barrett and all those Zion rumors, it was going to be a Duke pipeline and Cam Reddish going there. And maybe it just winds up being a Villanova pipeline. Who knows? So it's maybe that's the connecting of the dots there. But argument for Dante DiVincenzo, very similar to the one for Strus. His shot bounced back last year. He had been injured that sort of last season where he was in Milwaukee. Then they sent him to Sacramento and that weird Serge Ibaka deal that I don't think worked out for anybody. But with better health last year, shot 40% from 3 on 5 attempts a game, started 36 times for the Warriors, a guy who can be a serviceable complementary playmaker. He can defend multiple positions. He's smart. He knows how to sort of get in where he fits in. And a guy like that who can, not like huge size-wise, 6'4", 200, but can guard across maybe 3 perimeter positions in a pinch and has the pedigree of, high-level college success, has been a significant part of playoff teams in Milwaukee and in Golden State last year. That kind of guy can make sense in a lot of different places. It's like, I would imagine that for some teams, it's like, if you're not going to get Bruce Brown, this is the sort of plan B for that, the fallback option for it. And it's a pretty high end one that might wind up. I mean, it's interesting though, you say maybe the full non-taxpayer mid-level for him, then, makes you wonder what the upper end of the opportunities for Bruce Brown might be. But in terms of style of player, I think similar sort of fit for where it fits in with a lot of people.
Yeah. You mentioned Brucey B. He's our last bell of the ball. I just had the thought the other day. We need more drunk Mike Malone in our lives. It's been too long. It's been too long.
Whoa. Show the proper respect. It's drunk Michael Malone. He can be as drunk
Malone.
as he wants, but you're going to call him by that full first name.
Michael Malone. Okay. Bruce Brown.
You say it 3 times, he shows up in the mirror. It's like Bloody Mary or Candyman.
He shows up in the mirror with his shoulder tattoo and, hey, you, give me a beer. Back to the program. Bruce Brown. I think, originally the talk was, well, the Denver Nuggets can only give him $7.8 million. All these non-taxpayer teams can give him $12.2. I agree. I think there's plenty of talk right now that if you want Bruce Brown, if you want Brucey B, you're going to have to go above the non-taxpayer. We'll see. I mean, the Lakers stuff that Mike Singer reported from the Denver Post yesterday, I definitely caught wind of as well. The Lakers have a lot of balls in the air right now that we'll learn a lot more by the end of tonight with the team options for Malik Beasley and Mo Bamba, which maybe that'll come out as we're recording before this comes out. Someone around the situation told me that he expects the Lakers to take it up until the midnight Eastern deadline, just looking at all potential outcomes, picking up and turning over every stone. We'll see. But Bruce Brown, he's a bell of the ball. He's going to get paid. So it's just a matter of figuring out how much and by where.
Well, and let's talk about the why, right? Because when you're talking about a plug and play, target, he fits basically everywhere. If he was, 2 or 3 inches taller, he'd be like the perfect guy for this era of basketball. But he can start or come off the bench. He can basically play every position in terms of your scheme and in every role, whether it's ball handling or setting screens and diving, as he showed in Brooklyn. He hit around league average from 3 on significantly higher volume last year. He can handle and facilitate. He proved last year in Denver that he's not just like a small ball 4 or 5. He's a backup point guard. And he scored like he was a legitimate scoring threat in the playoffs. 16.3 points per 36 minutes in the playoffs. He shot 60.5% on 2s. So like a guy who can be a catch and shoot threat, who can run the pick and roll for you, who can cut off the ball, who can get downhill to the rim, who can defend 3, maybe 4 positions in a pinch. Like everybody can use that guy. And so the Lakers noise makes a ton of sense for me because it tracks with their they've steered the ocean liner back the other way, like organizational pivot back to let's surround our main guys with dudes who can dribble and pass and defend and hit shots, as opposed to like, let's get the one, like another superstar with it. It's like, no. We need a bunch of guys who can do a bunch of stuff. Bruce Brown can do a bunch of stuff and he can do it for, we can do it at the level he's getting to in his athletic prime. That's worth a lot of money. The mid-level made sense to me. 15, who knows? That might make sense to me too. As these things always go, like it only takes one team to set the market or to blow the market up. So there's going to be cap space out there. There's not a ton of teams that have like super huge cap space, but there's, rumblings. Like if Houston's shopping list gets weird, why not throw a bunch of money at him? He helps you make sense of your roster too. So wherever he winds up going, it's going to be a monster raise, well-deserved. And I think it's because he's proven in his last couple of stops, kind of whatever you need him to do, he can do it at a pretty high level.
That does it for our bells of the ball. We'll take a quick break here and we'll touch on some other potential big name guys. We'll touch on some most interesting teams of free agency. We'll touch on a lot. Stay with us. Welcome back to No Cap Room here. Ball Don't Lie, Podcast Network, Dan Devine, Jake Fischer. The biggest names of free agency all seem like they're sticking around where they're at. They all sound like they're staying put.
Jake, that's not the way you do this. You're like, huge news, it's about to go down, funk flex bombs coming down left and right. You have to be like, yeah, no, they're all going to, I don't know, they're going to play for the Toronto Argonauts. Whatever. It's going to be ridiculous. It's cross sport, cross league, cross whatever. Like try to drum up the interest, buddy. That's what we got to do.
I'm trying to bring responsible context before I drop some bombs. Okay.
Right,
that's what I'm trying to do.
Fair enough. Go ahead.
I mean, Chris Middleton, I definitely expect will be returning to Milwaukee. Draymond Green, despite all the smoke from Sacramento and talk of, Detroit and him going back to his hometown state, or I guess hometown state is a little bit redundant. You know what I'm saying?
Going back to Michigan.
The Memphis stuff. I mean, Houston was potentially flirting with him at certain points. I want to talk about Harden for a second because James Harden. Yes, okay. James Harden. We've all known and heard the Houston Rockets rumbling since Christmas. I have heard them, not again, to go back to not to say I know, I'm holding things, but
humble brag, I knew before Christmas.
No, I mean, I wrote this on Christmas after the reporting came out from ESPN. There was some talk that James and his people were making contact with Houston before he re-signed with Philly last summer. Right. So that wasn't necessarily a surprise to me all along, as it's continued to be Harden to Houston, Harden to Houston, Harden to Houston. Then Doc Rivers gets fired in May. And immediately, pretty much after that, the word started to shift, I think, amongst people at the Combine in Chicago that, oh, maybe James will actually stick around in Philadelphia. That's been the tune for a long time, especially with the Fred VanVleet stuff to Houston popping up. The last couple of days, as the Clippers have been calling around like we talked about earlier, I have started to hear some James Harden to the Clippers smoke. And I know from talking to multiple people around the situation that the Clippers, in their ongoing trade calls and outgoing stuff and checking around, they did contact Philadelphia about trades for Tobias Harris, which did not go very far.
That was going to be my next question.
And that they have at least broached the subject of, if James Harden were to opt in, how could the Clippers trade for him? So he's got an opt-in deadline tonight. When this comes out, maybe he's already opted out or whatever. But for now, I'm just bringing the most up-to-date, interesting information with responsible context to your Toronto Argonauts or whatever you said earlier. That this is at least a thing that's on the radar of people involved. I do expect Harden to go back to Philly, but I also definitely think that the Clippers are looking every which way to try to find some type of third creator, and maybe even a big name. If we hear, Kyrie Irving sign and trade smoke there pop up now that I saw Chris Haynes as we've been recording, and we'll get to that after this. We'll be meeting with Phoenix and Houston once free agency opens. I wouldn't be surprised there too. But for now, the only stuff I've confirmed with a team on the other side of the Clippers approaches here that's juicy and seems to be something that at least has been talked about. The Clippers and Harden is something just I feel like the world needs to at least know as well. So I'm saying it here, Dan, to you through our computers.
Thank you so much for making me the conduit on the other end of it. So if from the Clippers perspective, we need another high-end creator, but you have to if it's a sign and trade, you have to get something on the other end of it, or an opt-in and trade.
I think from what I've heard, the only way for him to get there, the only real mechanism that makes sense would be an opt-in and trade.
Right. Which then his number is 36.5 or something like that. So
right around there.
So then what comes the other way from LA? Is that like the combination of, is that like the kind of packages you were talking about earlier where it's, Morris, Covington, et cetera? I
think Terrence Mann would have to be going out in that type. Mm-hmm. If they're getting that level of player,
because Philly would need a starting level guard on the back end of that too.
Yeah. And again, I think James Harden's going to re-sign with Philly. I think this might just be...
Yeah, the most likely answer is always that nothing happens, right?
Yeah. I think this might just be some last ditch. Well, the Clippers are clearly calling around every team that they can think of would make sense as a trade partner to make some, moves and bring on an additional creative talent. And by creative, I mean ball handling creativity. Let's throw some of our meat on that Barbie and see if any smoke can turn into a fire. I think that might be what's happening as well. Because if the Houston Fred VanVleet stuff is as strong and real as we're getting word of it, then any potential leverage in this, if we're looking at this so crassly for Harden and Philly, might be going up in smoke as well.
I'm just on the like fan component side of it. I just find myself thinking, like, if you're a Clippers fan and you're like, this team has just like, we've never seen the realized version of it. We have not gotten the most reliable components of all this together. And like, we just need something more stable that we can bank on and believe in come the playoffs, because we never know who's going to be available. All right, what's your answer? James Harden is our big swing, new $40 million a year playoff answer. As I said, you can't check off every box with every signing. It's not always going to be perfect, but man, like, yeah, that feels like a ceiling raising, floor lowering, anxiety ratcheting up kind of potentiality there. But yeah, I mean, it's an interesting thought experiment. It's an interesting sort of roster building experiment. I'm still a little bit shaky on what it does from Philly's perspective, since they need to win the title now for this to make sense. But you know, TBD on all of that. And then
the only way it makes sense is if across the negotiating table at a certain point in time when this is all legal, James Harden and his people pound the table and say, we
like,
don't want to be here anymore.
Yeah,
get me the hell out of here. I'm opting in, and you must trade me or else I'm not going to report. Which, I mean, I don't think things will get that contentious.
Sure.
But yeah.
The fact that it's even been broached is interesting. If for no other reason than, like, you'd been hearing that the Clippers, things have been moving around with the Clippers, you know, and with, you know, in terms of who they've been shopping around. They have all these expiring contracts. They have all these mid-sized deals. They couldn't figure something out with Eric Gordon, so now he's on the waiver wire. And like, it does feel like the answer can't just be run everything back, extend Kawhi and Paul George at whatever number they want, and just hope for the best again, especially considering the multipliers of tax money that it's going to be. Like, even Steve Ballmer, it's not even that Steve Ballmer has limits in his pocket, but like, it's going to make it harder for them to find new answers. And they just lost one of their main front office guys. Like, this feels like some stuff might start shaking around, some furniture might start moving type situation for the Clippers. That would be an awfully big, I don't know, chaise lounge to try to move around the living room.
A sleeper couch, maybe. All right.
Only in game 6.
Let's go to Kyrie Irving, where Chris Haynes, who is definitely plugged in the Irving camp, is saying that he plans to meet with Phoenix, maybe Houston. I had heard earlier in the week that Kyrie was going to be taking meetings out in Los Angeles, but I'm still thinking that of all these situations, I mean, Dallas and Kyrie seem to need each other the most, being that Luka is Luka. As much as Joel Embiid is the reigning MVP, he's also approaching 30 and has had a myriad long, list of injuries. Like, Luka's still future face of the league type of talent that you really don't want to mess up. And you gave up a lot once Jalen Brunson also left the door or walked out the door to bring this guy in. Kyrie, I think maybe this is going to help him get the fully, or as close to the max long-term deal that he's hoping for and has been wanting since he had early extension talks with Brooklyn this time last summer and then decided to opt in. And that's what fell short in February and forced his trade request. I don't know. That's my Kyrie Irving dump. Dan, what are your thoughts on the player who will now be back to wearing number 11 after Derek Lively took number 2 and Tim Hardaway Jr. is mercifully stepping aside and giving those digits back to Kyrie?
Well, honor thy father, right? He's wearing 10 just like his dad. I think my first thought is that last summer, as you mentioned, the early extension discussions with the Nets, the sort of boogeyman hiding there was, well, he might just like opt out and take the minimum and go play for the Lakers, or he might, like the taxpayer mid-level, he might just do it. Who knows? We've established that Kyrie Irving might do, no one can sort of predict what his next move will be, and he's made a ton of money, and so maybe he'll just go and take a shorter, significant pay cut, but to go get where he wants to go. And then the result of that was he didn't, and he got as much money as he could make last year. And then he got out and now is in a situation to get as much money as he can make from the team that holds his bird rights. And so I mean, the meeting with Phoenix is interesting, because it sort of, it presents as a similar sort of leverage play, I suppose. Like, there's always this option. I could always just burn everything down and go play, be one of the many minimum salaried players over here. It seems very unlikely. Sometimes the simplest explanation is the most likely one. And it seems unlikely that if you have the opportunity to re-up on a multiple year maximum salary deal, you would turn that down to go take a smaller deal for less time elsewhere. So I think the sticking point or the negotiating point here might be about how many years Kyrie gets the max from Dallas. Dallas might be looking, I would imagine, and I'm certainly not providing any original reporting here, but if I'm Dallas, I'm thinking I'd rather do like a 2-year deal than a 4-year deal, right? Or if I, the longer, years over dollars is sort of my negotiating dividing line. And I would imagine Kyrie saying, I hear you and I don't like what you're saying and I want as much as humanly possible. And in order to make sure that I get that, I'm going to go have whatever meetings I can have. The most likely scenario, it seems to me, it would be that he goes back to Dallas on, I don't know, 3 or 4. But we'll see. And then in the meantime, why not go have some meetings and, have them take you out to dinner? Seems like a nice way to do business.
There you go. The last player that I expect to go back is Jeremy Grant. I know you're saying, I see in the notes here that you're saying Sacramento should just throw a big bag at him. I want to pat you on the back, applaud you in that. I've also heard several people in the league say like, that's what Sacramento should do. I don't think that's what's going to happen at this point.
Basically, from the time the Blazers dealt for him, I think the expectation was as soon as he can get to an extension, he's going to get it.
Yeah. And I think Sacramento is going to be, after looking at other options, I think they will be bringing back Harrison Barnes at this juncture as well. So last thing before we get out of here is that you've wrote a really long but very good free agency preview.
Good. Start with really good, not really long.
Really good free agency preview touching on your 5 most interesting teams of free agency, which are, according to Dan Devine, Houston, Toronto, Sacramento, Miami, Milwaukee. We talked a lot about Houston. Toronto, I think, is interesting in that if they do lose Fred, I'm so curious what they do point guard wise. I really haven't heard like a succession plan that they have. I know that
you don't think it's Malachi Flynn. You don't think they're just going to throw him the keys?
Flynn.
Nah.
There's a chance for that to be Gabe Vincent. I think Trey Jones being a restricted free agent in San Antonio, that could be potentially good leverage for him. The Heat, I wrote a lot about yesterday with their potential, it seems likely loss of Max Strus, and what do they do if they don't get Dame, which has started to have people wonder if Kyle Lowry would get waived and end a curious era in Miami after he was like a belle of the ball 2 years ago in free agency, which, the Milwaukee Bucks you have here. We talked about Middleton, a lot of curiosity about Lopez. I've started to hear some confidence that Jay Crowder goes back to Milwaukee, which makes sense because they gave up 5 second-round picks to acquire him.
And I think he played 381 total minutes there, regular season and playoffs. It's like, you gotta, if you're spending the 5 picks, you got to get some more minutes out of that.
Yeah. And the prompt I've been given is, so who is my most interesting team?
Well, that was my curiosity. Yeah, I look at all the, looking at the list of who's got the most cap space, who's got outgoing free agents, who's got yada yada yada, and I came up with my 5, and I'm wondering if you were given the same assignment, although not to write nearly as many words apparently. Who would top your list?
So one team we haven't talked about that I want to touch on just in this last couple minutes here, the Orlando Magic. They're not the sexy big market team that our production team probably wants to be teasing out, but they've got plenty of cap space. They've got a burgeoning young core. Anthony Black, who they selected number 6 overall in last Thursday's draft, has a lot of fans around the league, which has made people wonder about the futures of probably Jalen Suggs most particularly, being that Markelle Fultz and Cole Anthony are both extension eligible. So I just wonder exactly where they're going. I mean, this is a franchise ownership group that approved like a balloon 1-year, $15 million deal for Jeff Green like many moons ago. So I'm curious, like, are they a team that does that, something like that to get Max Strus in the door, or, are they someone that goes after Grant Williams? Like, I don't know what they're going to do. They're a very coy organization. They keep things under lock and key pretty largely there, but They also could, and I was talking to an agent who's very familiar with their organization who was saying that they could just be taking back someone into space and taking on capital. And like, is that someone also someone like John Collins? Obviously he's not on the board, but like John Collins was a quote unquote salary dump, but like the Jazz are definitely expecting John Collins is going to be good for them this year.
Right.
So is there a way for the Magic to get better in that avenue? Maybe. It'll be interesting. The Magic just have a window here to do something. I don't know what they're going to do. I'm curious to find out because they're a team that I think also if things break right for them, if everyone continues to get better, if the pieces fit, I wonder if they could even make a push to be out of the play-in push altogether and like sneak into the back end. I'm not like predicting that to happen by any means, but like you look at the West compared to the East next season, I just feel like the playoff landscape is far more open in the Eastern Conference compared to what's going on in the West.
Well, yeah, and they were, they had a dreadful start to the season. I think they opened 5-20, and then they were an above 500 team the rest of the way. And so there's cause for optimism there. Jamal Mosley has them, is leveraging that size and length and all that youth and athleticism into a pretty good defense that's got some interesting pieces on the offensive end. I think to your point about what's making them an interesting team is where do they feel like they're short? And obviously the screaming answer is shooting. They need shooters because there's not a real plus shooter with the exception of maybe you could argue Franz Wagner for a three is a plus shooter. Gary Harris has, come around in that regard after a couple of down seasons, but he's also, his contract might wind up being non-guaranteed and might be a place they look at improving things. But with, Fultz, Jalen Suggs, you just drafted Anthony Black and Jet Howard in the lottery. You've got Paolo Banchero, Wendell Carter Jr. up front, Bol still in the mix. There's Wagner pretty, set at the three there. They're like, what positions do you feel most need improvement or could benefit from some competition on that roster? And they are SpotTrack's Keith Smith has them at about $24 million in cap space projections. So like, not enough to go make a, monster, max level signing. But as you said, either to take in somebody else's money or one of those sort of balloon payments that like JJ Redick style with the Sixers a couple of years ago, like 1 year, 20 million sort of deal. Is there a plus shooter like that out there? Is Strus that guy? Do they see another person like that makes sense for them? Also, every time I've thought they should add shooting, they just get another giant guy with extremely long arms. So I don't know if there's somebody that sort of fits their profile, but also would boost their offensive ceiling. Maybe they think that just the combination of like enough stretch for Carter, Banchero, getting his shot around, like they will wind up with enough shooting in the aggregate. But there's enough ingredients there to be pretty interesting. And they've definitely made consistent incremental progress. There's no reason that they shouldn't think of themselves as a team that can break through at least into the play-in mix. And maybe if things break right above that, but I think it's going to need more shooting for that offense to kind of start to take shape.
More shooting could be Max Strus, as our producer, John Gennaro, slacks me saying, maybe Strus can get loose in Orlando, which he wouldn't have to change states, just drive up, drive up 95, get to Disney World and have a ball. I think it's a lot of the ball now. I mean, he is the belle of the ball. Max Strus, man, he is just going to get paid. Shout out to, the Heat culture, the undrafted program that Eric Spoelstra doesn't want you talking about. They get their guys paid. But there is definitely like not a great track record of those guys getting paid elsewhere. Like Hassan Whiteside, I guess he got paid by Miami, but didn't really continue. And Josh Richardson has been serviceable, but not exactly like the leading scorer option that he was projecting at in Miami. So it'll be interesting. Strus does seem pretty replicable what he's doing elsewhere. I'm bullish on Max Strus, okay? But it'll be interesting to see how this all unfolds. Any final words? Anything else you want to say before we get out of here and I drive my sister's car back into Manhattan?
Well, first off, drive safe, stay off your phone, because I know that you're in the middle of trying to break a lot of stuff, but like don't do that while you're driving. That's very important.
There's a lot of Bluetooth connectivity going on.
Even so, I was like, Jake, I'm very nervous. I just want to make sure that you're being safe and that you're being safe for the people around you. Because it's not just about whether you hurt yourself, it's about whether you hurt somebody else. All right. You got to be careful out there. I feel really good about coming up with NC Armada. I feel like that's a really strong addition to our lore. It's burgeoning here. And I think you're absolutely right to point out that the Clippers feel like a big swing team. Like they were on the verge of the 5. And then honestly, once I found out that the art was locked, I was like, well, I'm not going to mess with this. But when I was like, I can write around that and that's fine. But the sheer stakes for that organization, like everything they've invested in Leonard and Paul, and Paul George, everything they've invested in that new, building a championship contending team ahead of that new building that they're opening up in Inglewood next, not this year, but the year after it. Like there's just so much coming to a head there. If they're going to break through, it feels like they're going to have to make some big changes or get, I don't know, find bionic legs, one or the other. And maybe, I don't know if you can add that in the free agent market, but if you can get some robot legs, the non-taxpayer mid-level seems like a pretty penny for that. But well worth the investment. We're looking into it. We're looking into robot legs.
Bruce Brown, let's robot make that legs, take your pick.
Let's make that the headline here. We're looking into robot legs. There you go. No cap room.
We're looking into robot legs. We're looking into all the fun stuff that will probably come out late Friday or Friday evening, whenever the timing it will all be. And then throughout the weekend and then into Las Vegas Summer League next week, we'll be recording. I guess I'm skipping the line of our intro here, but I'm just going off the top of my head and not even looking at our rundown. We'll be recording our next edition of No Cap Room on Wednesday, following adjustments for travel schedule on behalf of Las Vegas Summer League. But that'll do it for us on No Cap Room today. Thanks to John Gennaro, our producer behind the glass. If you want to follow us on Twitter, because it still exists, I am at Jake L. Fischer. That is at your man Devine. And we would love it. It'd be great. We'd so appreciate it if you subscribe to Ball Don't Lie on YouTube or whatever podcast platform you're currently listening on and give us a 5-star review. The Good Word with Goodwill will be back before us on Monday. And that's it. Thank you so much. Thank you for listening. And please come back next time for another edition of No Cap Room on the Ball Don't Lie podcast network.